that I'll admit to Hashem, I have no problem doing it from the Ehel. But then I got carried away in a conversation with someone and I lost track of time. But in any case, here I am. As you could see, ready to start davening a little late, but that's fine. I don't have any other schedule other than to give this shir. So last week we spoke about Kiddush, and I promised to give an element in the halachas of Kiddush that are Kabbalistic and something we're familiar with, and that's the not making Kiddush on Friday night on the seventh hour following half day. Okay? So on an average day, such as on the equinox, for example, twice a year, that would be, if you're in the center of a time zone, that would be between 6 and 7 o'clock. So we're all familiar with that. And I promised that I would elaborate on that minhag, which we didn't get to last week, which is not surprising. That happens all the time. But before I begin, here we go again. But there is, so last night there was a Farbrengen here at the Eihel in honor of Chav Beis Shvat, and one of the speakers at the Farbrengen, Rabbi Mendel Feller, my mechutin from Minnesota, he mentioned something about Kiddush that he heard from Rabbi Binyamin Klein. So Rabbi Binyamin Klein was one of the maskirim, one of the secretaries of the Rebbe. So when the Rebbe had the heart attack in Tavshin Lamed Ches, 19 was Shuni Atzeres of 1977. So the Rebbe never went to the hospital. They brought all the hospital equipment to the Rebbe's room, and the Rebbe basically was being treated in his room, in his office in 770. So the Rebbetzin actually moved into 770, and the Rebbe, Shabbos, for example, the Rebbe had his Suda Shabbos in his room, and the Rebbetzin would join in the Rebbe's room for Suda Shabbos together with the Rebbe. So on Shabbosim, every other Shabbos, the different secretaries would take turns who would be available to help and to serve and to whatever was necessary for the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. So he told this story. It was something that had happened. He said that when he was pouring the Rebbe's Kiddush, so he said the Rebbe was standing, the Rebbetzin was standing. This is all in the Rebbe's room, on the Rebbe's table, on the Rebbe's desk. Or actually, I think maybe they brought in a small table. And he poured the Rebbe's cup for Kiddush. Now, the halacha is that for the cup of Kiddush, there are a number of different requirements. And one of the requirements is that the cup of Kiddush should be full. Kais mole, a full cup. But then in Shulchan Aruch, it says very clearly that you don't have to pour over, because that would be make a mess. That would be taking a mitzvah and creating a mess, which is improper when it comes to a mitzvah. Now, this is in contrast to the minhag of Havdalah. By Havdalah, it says that since you're beginning a new week and you want to start with a bracha for abundance, so by Havdalah, it became the custom that you do pour over the cup, and halacha even says that you're not really so concerned about making a mess because it's for a sinun bracha. But by Kiddush, though, the halacha says clearly that you have to fill up the cup, but it doesn't even have to go to the tippy top because you don't want to make a mess. And like I mentioned, that would be improper while doing a mitzvah. Okay. So he poured the cup, and the Rebbe was standing, and the Rebbe was waiting. And the Rebbetzin was waiting, and he wasn't exactly sure what they were waiting for. After a brief few moments, I guess a few awkward moments, the Rebbetzin spoke up. And the Rebbetzin said, by uns firzach amigist iber. Our custom is that we overflow. These were the words as he repeated them in the name of the Rebbetzin. As I remembered being told yesterday, hardly claim that these are the exact words, obviously, but that's the way it was repeated. That by uns firzach, our custom is amigist iber, that you pour over. So there you have it. This was Rabbi Binyamin Klein, based on his testimony of what he observed in the Rebbe's room with regard to Kiddush, that in spite of what it says in Shulchan Aruch, the minhag is that for Kiddush, the Rebbe would also do like we commonly do for Havdalah, and pour the cup to the point where it actually overflows. Okay. Now, I remember once in Lubavitch Center, it was probably the Kiddush after davening, and we were talking about this, and Betzalel Bassman was present, and I mentioned that, pouring over is in Shulchan Aruch, that is something we do for Havdalah. We make an exception even though you're making a mess, right? But by Kiddush, I felt that maybe it wasn't, based on what I knew from Shulchan Aruch. Okay, I was actually there at that occasion when Rabbi Klein told this, but I don't recall. I wasn't really paying attention. So Betzalel Bassman, a little while later, he comes over to me and he shows me that it's actually a sicha from the Rebbe in the year Tavshin Mem Beis. And I was discussing this with a friend of mine here at the Oihel, who just actually walked into the room. And I told him that Betzalel Bassman, he gave me a reference to a sicha from the Rebbe. So I texted Betzalel Bassman. I said, listen, you told me that there was a sicha from the Rebbe about this. Can you please, send it to me really quick? So he did. And Baruch Hashem, I had time, I looked it up, and there it is. The Rebbe in Tavshin Mem Beis, 1982. This was summer of 1982. The Rebbe just said, like, matter of fact, that our minhag is that we overflow the cup of kos shel bracha. He just said kos shel bracha. Now, like I mentioned, in Shulchan Aruch it says this in reference to Havdalah, but kos shel bracha is not just Havdalah. Kos shel bracha for his Kiddush. Any Kiddush is a cup of wine that you fill up, over which you make a bracha, where the bracha is part of the mitzvah. And I guess this would include any kos shel bracha, like Sheva brachas, or whatever it may be, has a special designation called the cup of blessing. And the Rebbe just said, matter of factly, that our minhag is that, as is known, the minhag, said the Rebbe, to overflow. So, okay. So there you have it, officially on record in the volume 3 of the Beis Menachem. I'm sorry, the Rebbe Siches, in the Svadios, in the Fabrengens, of Teres Menachem, and it's on page 1692 if you want to look it up. But but there the Rebbe says as follows. The Rebbe says that after he stated, as a matter of fact, that this is the minhag, the Rebbe said, so but how do we reconcile this with what it says in Shulchan Aruch, that that although we make the exception for Havdalah, but generally for Kiddush, you fill up the cup, but you don't have to fill it to the tippy top so it doesn't spill all over and make a mess. Said the Rebbe that what it says in Shulchan Aruch about making a mess is if it's going to pour all over. The Rebbe says all over the floor, for that matter, I guess all over the table, and therefore said the Rebbe, when you do this, right, make sure that there's a plate underneath the cup, and so when it does pour over, so then it it should pour over into the plate. But then the Rebbe addressed another question: isn't this being wasteful? We know that in Shulchan Aruch, We're very particular about not wasting. It's called Bal Tashkis. So why? How come this is not considered being wasteful? So said the Rebbe, since we're doing it as a siman bracha, and again, this it says only by Havdalah, but yet the Rebbe took it from Havdalah and the Rebbe applies it to all case shel bracha. So the Rebbe said, since you're doing it for the purpose of adding blessing and adding bracha, so says the Rebbe. So therefore, the Rebbe says that's that therefore it's not wouldn't be considered that you're wasting the wine. So there you have it, official record that for Kiddush, our minig, according to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, or for that matter, anytime we fill up a cup of wine in the context of a mitzvah, and it's called a kos shel bracha, a cup of blessing, where our custom is to overflow. So mitzvah Hashem, I want to wish everybody for tonight when you make Kiddush and tomorrow that you make Kiddush, that your cups should be overflowing with wine and bracha, that it symbolizes the blessings that it should bring. Okay, so there we got that. That was because this is fresh. I just heard it yesterday in the name of Rabbi Binyamin Klein from Aymechutin, Rabbi Mendel Fellow. And he didn't know about this Sikha in Membeis, but I told him, I said, listen, I know there's a Sikha about this because Betzal Basman showed it to me. And I didn't show it to Rabbi Mendel Fellow last night, but this morning I had time to look it up, and indeed it is there. Well, I asked Betzalo to give me a little bit of exactly where it was, and I was able to find it. In any case, back to the what I promised. I don't have. Okay. Oh, we have plenty. We have plenty of time. Okay. So, as far as the minhag of not making Kiddush between the seventh hour following Chatzos, following noon of Friday. So, this is, again, it's a halacha that's brought as a minhag. The source of the minhag is from a sefer called Tikkunei Shabbos. Tikkunei Shabbos is a sefer that was written by one of the Talmidei Arizal, I believe. Tikkunei Shabbos, wer hat das geschrieben? Von the Talmidei Arizal. So this would be, the Arizal we know did not write his own Torah. Most of what we have from the Arizal are from his Talmidim, primarily from Reb Chaim Vital. So this may be from Reb Chaim Vital, I don't remember exactly. Tikkunei Shabbos, if you want, you can Google it as we're speaking. But it's for sure from the time of the Arizal. And in the Tikkunei Shabbos, it mentions the minhag of not making Kiddush in that hour. Okay. And he says very shortly, he doesn't really elaborate. And he says that okay, so this has to do with a broader subject. And I will elaborate on that a little bit. And that has to do with what's called mazolis. Now, mazolis in the secular world, these are the zodiac signs or whatever. And we certainly don't want to pay any attention to that. But it has its source in Torah. The Gemara mentions numerous times the significance of the mazel. Now, what is it on the surface? It's based on observations that we make in the heavens. And the way the Torah looks at things that we are able to observe in the heavens is that basically these are signs that Hashem is showing us. By the way Hashem arranges the stars and the things that we're able to observe in the Shamayim, in the heaven, these are all things that give us somewhat of an indication of how Hashem is creating the world. Now we know, of course, that Hashem is constantly, he is animating and keeping in existence the world. So the world is sustained by the energy that Hashem is investing in the creation. So this is something that the Alter Rebbe speaks about at great length. Tanya, primarily in Shayichat Emunah, but in other places as well. So Hashem is constantly creating the world. Now that energy that Hashem uses to create the world, it's not some kind of a generic godly energy. the energy has some kind of a character to it. Now, the character of the energy of Hashem, like we can't give characteristics to Hashem, but we know that Hashem, when He created the world, He filtered the energy through the spheres and into Hishtalshalus, and through the filtering, it then acquires a characteristic. So when we see it as having something unique, something special. They're different, right? Now, this, of course, applies to every moment, every day. When it comes to the mazoles that we're going to speak about now, we're talking about the mazoles of each hour of the day. We're more familiar probably about the mazoles of the months. And that is where there's the similarity between Lahavdil, the zodiac, whatever. But like I said, it has its source, and the Gemara speaks at great length, many times, not so much at great length, but frequently. The Gemara makes mention of the significance of the time that we happen to be in reference to what we're observing in the heavens. Okay. So, like I said, mazoles, there's all different classifications of mazoles, the way it is for the months, the way it is for the days, and especially the way it is, and also with reference to the Kiddush and this minhag as it is for the hours. Okay. By the way, there's the famous story when the Alter Rebbe was in prison, so he was in a cell where there was no window, so there was no way to observe physically, what time of the day it was. And the question was, how did the Alter Rebbe know? There are many halachas that have to do with the time of the days, man krishma, etc., etc. So what day it is? So how did the Alter Rebbe know? So the answer is the Alter Rebbe was very in tune with the spiritual energy that was creating the world, and the Alter Rebbe was able to tell that based on the mazel through which Hashem's energy is being filtered into the world, he was able to tell what time of the day it was. So this is something, of course, that the Alter Rebbe was able to do. We're not necessarily quite on that level, but nonetheless, we do know from Torah and many sources what the mazel is for that particular time of the day. So, when it comes to the hours of the day, so this is, like I said, the Tikkun Shabbos mentions, and he just says very shortly. He says it's very appropriate that we should make Kiddush in the mazel that's called tzedek. Okay, so tzedek means, like, from the word tzedakah, righteousness, which is a positive thing, meaning that the hour of the day for which the energy is being filtered through the mazel of tzedek is a good and appropriate time to make Kiddush. Okay. It so happens to be that in Shulchan Aruch, the Magen Avram brings this minhag from the Tikkun Shabbos, which is very common. The Magen Avram is printed on the side of the Shulchan Aruch of the Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef himself, was a contemporary of the Arizal. And the Magen Avram, who came a while later, when he wrote his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch of the Beis Yosef, the Magen Avram would very often quote things that are brought in the Tikkun Shabbos. Now, the Alter Rebbe, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, this is like 150, 200 years later, the Alter Rebbe was very much, he wrote the Shulchan Aruch and he based what he wrote on numerous, backgrounds of the Rishonim and Acharonim. But the one that the Alter Rebbe relied on heavily was the Magen Avram. So it's almost throughout the Shulchan Aruch we see that when there's a difference of opinion between the Magen Avram and another one of the commentaries, the Taz or others, the Alter Rebbe generally sides with the Magen Avram. So when the Magen Avram brings this minhag, so it's expected that the Alter Rebbe will bring it in Shulchan Aruch as well. And indeed, in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, he says there are those that are familiar with the Kabbalistic the nature of things, have the minhag that they do not to make Kiddush in that hour. Okay. In Shulchan Aruch, there is a commentary on the Magen Avraham called the Machzis HaShekel, and the Machzis HaShekel writes at great length. He writes about explaining this minhag. So let me tell you what the Machzis HaShekel says, and this is where I'm getting my information from. And he says as follows: when the Gemara mentions the different hours and the different mazoles for each hour, so what are these mazoles? So he says, now if you look up in the sky, besides the formation of the stars, right? The formation of the stars, basically, from our perspective, they don't change. Everything in the sky is fixed. It's all fixed. The only thing is that the whole thing is constantly rotating. So what we see in the summer is not what we see in the winter. But when it comes to next summer, we see again exactly what we saw the summer before, right? So anybody knows a little bit, maybe in 5th grade, you learned about the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, and they're all up there, and they don't change. Certainly not from our observation or with our sight. Maybe, with highly sensitive telescopes, you could see whatever. There's all kinds of stuff now that astronomers are discovering. But in any case, like I said, on the surface, since the times of Avraham Avinu until today, when you look up in the sky, you're pretty much seeing exactly the same thing that Avraham Avinu saw, or for that matter, Adam Rishon saw on the 4th day of creation, on Wednesday, when Hashem put all of these heavenly bodies up there in the sky. Okay. So there's an exception to the fit picture of the sky. And that is that you notice that there are visibly, we know that there are many more today, but visibly to the human eye, there are 7 things in the sky that are actually constantly moving. They're also called stars because they look like stars, except for 2 of them, which is the sun and the moon of the 7, right? Those are 2 out of the 7. But the other 5 are actually planets that are visible to the human eye. And these planets, they look like stars from our perspective, but they're called the koichvei leches. These are stars that are constantly moving around. So these 7 stars, they represent the mazel. Each of them stand for a different hour, which means that every hour, so there's what's called the Chama of the sun. There's what's called Noiga, which is one of the planets. There's let me see. I used to know them all off by heart, but whatever. Haven't reviewed it for a while. But the different one of them is Maidim, by the way. Maidim is Mars, and that's also visible to the human eye. And each of them represent a different mazel. And those mazoles are like I said before, they're the filter, the funnel through which Hashem creates the world for that hour. And therefore, Kabbalistically speaking, each hour has a different characteristic. And the things that we do, according to Kabbalah, for example, the reason why Shema is said in the first 4 hours of the day, or the first 3 hours of the day, and Tefillah and Shema Nesri, the first 4 hours of the day, is because it aligns with the energy, with the mazel of that time of the day. Okay. That's a little confusing if you try to put the 2 things together, but that's the general idea. So, these 7 mazoles, they go through a rotation. Now, this rotation began when Hashem created the world, and he put these bodies into the sky. So that was Wednesday. So beginning on the first hour of Wednesday, now the day, of course, according to the Torah, starts at night. So nightfall of Wednesday is the point at which we begin each hour representing a different of these 7 these 7 mazoles. So the first hour Wednesday is the first of the seven, the second hour would be the second, and so on. And then it keeps on going in a rotation. So as it turns out, because we have 7 days of a week, right? So if you go through this cycle, so the throughout the 7 days, any given hour of the day, if it's let's say the noon, the first hour after noon of any given day is always going to be the same mazel because the cycles coincide. 7 days, 7 of these moving stars. And then when you go through 7 days, this is simple math multiplication. It's going to basically, so you have 24 hours of a day. If you do 7 times 24, it's going to be a number that's divisible by 7, obviously, right? So when you finish the cycle, when you come to next week, the beginning of Wednesday, when you come to Wednesday night, the beginning of Wednesday, which is basically Tuesday night, as we refer to it, begins that cycle all over from the beginning, okay? And because the two cycles coincide perfectly, which is, by the way, an interesting different topic, that the 7 days of the week seems to be like an arbitrary number, but that is what the Torah basically has decided, and so it's not arbitrary at all. And we have 7 days of the week, and like I said, these two, and that's how we live our lives, based on that cycle of 7 days of a week, even in the secular world, for that matter. So it turns out that every single given hour of any day of the week, right, of the 24 hours of that day, they're always going to be that specific mazel. It's going to be represented by that particular mazel of the 7 mazalis. So if you make the calculation, and by the way, in the art scroll, I think in Masechta Rosh Hashanah in the back, because I think it's in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, there's some mention about this idea. So I think it's in the back of the art scroll where they do a more lengthy, explanation. Things that were discussed in the Gemara. They have a chart to show you exactly any hour of the day. So if you know which hour of the day you were born, you know in which mazel you were born, and the Gemara actually makes reference to that. So okay. Like if somebody was born in the mazel of Mars, of Madim, so Madim represents blood, red, and it represents blood. And it says that person may have a tendency to spill blood. So it's a good idea for that person to perhaps channel that into something positive and to become a sheikhet. So I don't know exactly what mazel I was born in, but I did become a sheikhet. And that, Baruch Hashem, is diverting whatever negative energy into something, Baruch Hashem, positive. I mean that there's some negative energy lurking in my persona is pretty obvious to me. But this is this is how the Gemara suggests that we deal with it. Okay. Okay. So it turns out. This is all from the Machzis HaShekel in his commentary on the Magen Avram, where he brings this minute of the Tikkun Shabbos. So it turns out that if you calculate exactly the first hour of Shabbos, now the first hour of Shabbos is going to be, on average, like I say, the equinox day, where everything equalizes. Right? The day and the night are the same amount of time. So if you count from noon of Friday on any given week, the mazel on the hour before Shabbos is going to be tzedek. Tzedek represents something that's pretty much positive. Nothing is absolutely positive, but it's generally positive. The next hour, which is maidim, and by the way, this mazel is the mazel that it's mentioned is the mazel that's in charge of bloodshed, like I said. So like wars and so on and so forth, which are not necessarily negative, but they're not the happiest things in the world. They might be necessary, but they're certainly not, that they're not happy things. And that's the mazel of Maidim. So if on average Shabbos, the first hour of the night, which would be the 7th hour, so you have 6 hours from noon, right? So that's half of the 12-hour day. So you count from noon 6 hours, and then the beginning of the next hour, which is the 7th hour, that hour is always the hour that's attributed to the mazel of Mars, the mazel of Mike. Okay? So what is the Tikkun Shabbos saying? The Tikkun Shabbos is saying that why Kiddush is such a great mitzvah, a beautiful mitzvah, and the halacha is that you should make Kiddush as quickly as possible when Shabbos begins. You don't have to cut short the Kabbalah Shabbos. You could sing the Chadaydi and the Chonaranana, and enjoy yourself, and you don't have to rush through the davening in order to make Kiddush. But once the davening is over, the halacha is that one should not delay. One should do, even though technically you could do the mitzvah of Kiddush any time of Friday night, and even if you missed it Friday night, you can make it up even on Shabbos, where then you would not just say a very Pri Hagafen, you would actually say the whole bracha of Mekadesh HaShabbos. But it's preferable to do it immediately after davening when you come home from shul, without delaying it. Okay. So therefore, says the Maftis HaShekel, what the Tikkun Shabbos is saying, Shabbos, we don't have to wait for nightfall for Shabbos. There's a certain period of time before Shabbos, which is on average an hour and a quarter, 75 minutes before nightfall, before sunset, to be more accurate, is the time which is called Plag Mincha. I'm not going to get into that right now, but during that time, you could already begin Shabbos. As a matter of fact, it's a mitzvah. And again, I'm not going to get into that too much, but it's actually a mitzvah to precede the accepting of Shabbos before the actual nightfall, when it will naturally begin. So nightfall, Shabbos begins, whether you like it or not. And then you're subject to all of the halachos and the mitzvahs of Shabbos. But you have the option, and not only the option, but you have a mitzvah to make it somewhat earlier, right? To be makdim, to precede the actual nightfall with the acceptance of Shabbos. And you have the option of doing it as early as 75 minutes on average on that perfect day, the equinox day. It'll be 75 minutes exactly before nightfall. Okay, so if that's the case, if you have that option, so what the Tikkun Shabbos is recommending, why wait for the beginning of Shabbos naturally, which was going to be on average the first hour of nightfall, which corresponds to the Madim, the Mazel that allows for certain negative things to happen as well, unless we intervene. Rather than a time of tzedek, which is just naturally positive, it requires less intervention, for positive outcomes. It would be a good idea to make Kiddush in the mazel of tzedek. Now, everything I'm telling you, by the way, has a big practical complication. That is because we live pretty north of the equator. We only have those 2 days of the equinox in the year, right? So all of this, is almost like, well, 1 second, the first hour of Shabbos is not necessarily the 7th hour after Chatzos. In the summer, it's going to be later. In the winter, it's going to be even earlier. So that complicates things, and the Maftis HaShekel actually addresses it. But whatever, we're not going to get into that. But the bottom line is, let's just assume that everything is perfect, and the Shabbos always begins in the 7th hour, and that's when the sun sets after 12-hour day of a perfect equal day divided by 12 and 12, and we're just going to go with that assumption. Like I said, it is discussed, but we're not going to get into that. Okay. But the thing that is constant is the mazel of each hour. It's going to be whether it's night already or whether it's still day. That hour is going to correspond to that mazel. So that is the hour that we don't make Kiddush. Now, it seems that our emphasis is more about not making Kiddush in the mazel of Maidim. But if you look in the source, it's not so much about not making Kiddush in that hour. It's about preferring to make Kiddush, since you anyway have a mitzvah to start Shabbos early, to start Shabbos early enough that you could actually make Kiddush in the mazel that precedes the mazel of Mars, which is the mazel of Tzedek, the mazel of righteousness. Okay, so that's the bottom line as far as this minhag. There's a fellow that I believe is coming to Pittsburgh. He went to school here in Pittsburgh. His name is Tamir Goodman, famous for his basketball capabilities and for his devotion to Yiddishkeit, where he declined certain very lucrative offers in the world of basketball, so not to in any way compromise his Shmira Shabbos. So that's probably what he's known for his basketball skills, but he's famous for his declining some very real, lucrative offers because they would conflict with Shabbos. Okay. I think he's coming to Pittsburgh. I noticed somewhere that in one of the flyers or whatever. So he happens to be a student of mine. So that year we wanted to print like a little kibitz, like a notebook, a pamphlet or whatever, more than a pamphlet, but and different things that the students would write for Shabbos. So the Alter Rebbe, on the one hand, so there's an interesting halacha where the Alter Rebbe brings this minhag of the Tikkun Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe says that in spite of this minhag, right, it shouldn't be in conflict with the halacha that you should make Kiddush as soon as possible. So, if it turns out that when you're ready for Kiddush, it's already the mazel of Maidim, says the Alter Rebbe that it shouldn't be in conflict. Don't wait, because the halacha, when it's in conflict with a minhag of Kabbalah, the basic halacha always takes preference. That's what it seems that the Alter Rebbe is saying. But then the Alter Rebbe adds one line, and he says, but I already mentioned that it's better to make Kiddush in the mazel of Tzedek, or the hour before, because the Alter Rebbe, that's where the Alter Rebbe discusses that it's a recommended thing to actually start Shabbos even earlier than the natural time of sunset. And so the Alter Rebbe says, so it shouldn't really actually affect, because you should be making Kiddush before that hour anyway. That's what it seems the Alter Rebbe is saying. However, I saw a letter from the Rebbe. The Rebbe was addressing this minhag. Somebody asked something about the minhag, and I believe that it was a letter, it was a letter coming from someone in Eretz Yisro. And that person in Eretz Yisro was telling the Rebbe that there in Eretz Yisro, this minhag has never really caught up. So in Eretz Yisro, it's not the minhag to refrain from making Kiddush in that hour. That's what the person writes to the Rebbe. So very interestingly, I mentioned about Tamir Goodman, by the way. So what does this have to do with Tamir Goodman? So I was helping him to prepare something, for this thing we wanted to publish. So I said, there seems to be, like a question here, because the Alter Rebbe on the one hand suggests that we shouldn't follow this minhag if it's going to be in conflict with the basic halacha that you should make Kiddush you shouldn't delay the Kiddush. So I said, I suggested to him, and together we learned the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and we discovered that there's another halacha that perhaps could be the basis for our being somewhat lenient in pushing off the Kiddush, till later. Okay. And there's actually other sources for this, but the halacha that the Alter Rebbe says that if it's Shabbos comes, and it's time, you should make Kiddush right away. But Kiddush, there's a condition. Kiddush always has to be done together with the meal. You can't just do an isolated Kiddush. Kiddush has to be done in conjunction with a meal. If that's the case, is the Alter Rebbe, what if somebody's just not hungry? And you don't want to force yourself to eat the meal. It's part of the mitzvah of Shabbos, right? So you want to eat the meal when you have an appetite to eat the meal. Says the Alter Rebbe, okay, so in that case, it's all right to wait. You have a whole night anyway to make Kiddush. Making Kiddush in the beginning it's part of the mitzvah, but it's called mitzvah min hamuvchar. It's not conditional. It's not an absolute. And in that case, says the Alter Rebbe, you could actually wait until you're hungry and then make Kiddush and have your meal. Okay, so I said maybe this explains the minhag of that we commonly observe, that in Lubavitch we don't see people running home, and certainly not if it's like in the time of the year when that hour happens to be when shul is over, and in Lubavitch Center, people they stay in shul, they learn and whatever, and they come home. They kind of like try to arrange that when they come home, it should be in the time when that hour has already passed. So together with Tamir Goodman, we said, okay, so maybe this will be like a justification for what we observe within the Lubavitch community. Okay, got printed. It's on record. It's signed by Tamir Goodman, and this is what we came up with. But then I saw a letter from the Rebbe responding to this person writing from Eretz Yisrael. And the person from Eretz Yisrael is saying that it's not their minhag. It's not their minhag in Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbe actually responds with a justification for the fact that in Israel, if it's true, so the Rebbe says there could be a justification for that. And what the Rebbe says is that the Alter Rebbe himself, when he brings this minhag, seems to be indicating that it should not be in conflict with the basic halacha that it's best to do the mitzvah of Kiddush right away. Now, the Rebbe is not advocating that we drop this minhag, not by not by a long shot. That's not what the Rebbe is saying. The Rebbe is just saying that for those in Eretz Yisrael who don't have that minhag, there is, some basis that we can justify it from the Alter Rebbe himself, because when the Alter Rebbe, like I just said, when he brings that minhag, he also says it shouldn't be in conflict. Now, what I learned from that letter is that what Tamir Goodman and myself came up with is actually not the Rebbe's way of learning the Alter Rebbe. Because so when the Alter Rebbe writes that, immediately he qualifies it. He says, but I anyway said that you should make Kiddush early, before that hour. But according to the Rebbe is really not focusing on that. The Rebbe is focusing on the Alter Rebbe as if the Alter Rebbe is saying that it shouldn't be in conflict and therefore don't wait, which is another way to interpret what the Alter Rebbe is saying. In other words, basically the Alter Rebbe says, it comes this hour, if it's the time for Kiddush, you shouldn't delay it, right? That's in spite of the fact that Chabad doesn't, we don't see, many don't pay attention to that. But that's what seems to be what the Alter Rebbe is saying. But then the Alter Rebbe qualifies it and he says, but anyway, I said you should make Kiddush before. But it does not exclude the fact that the Alter Rebbe is saying, but if you didn't make Kiddush before, when that hour comes, and it's time to eat, it shouldn't be in conflict with the halacha. The justification of what that we said, still, it could be applied. This is okay, fine, but the Alter Rebbe already said in halacha before that but if you don't have an appetite, well, the Rabbi Chassid, he knows that there's this minute from the Tikkun Zayir, so that's going to ruin his appetite. He's not going to want to eat in that hour. So that would be the justification. That would be, we'll call it the Tamir Goodman justification. But the Rebbe says that the Alter Rebbe in general seems to be siding with not giving precedence to that minhag over the basic halacha of making Kiddush as soon as you could. So again, I don't know that the Rebbe meant that as to tell us how we should what we should follow. It was more about somehow justifying what they're doing in Eretz Yisrael, or at least in whatever in the community that this person who was writing this letter was writing from. Anyway, so this is what I promised you last week. Not so much what we spoke about at the end, but more about the basic explanation of this minhag based on these hourly mazalos and where this whole minhag comes from. I do want to say that I've heard that some people want to suggest that this only applies when you're making Kiddush on red wine. And I was forever saying that I have no idea where that came from, and I am highly suspicious that it has absolutely no basis whatsoever. So that was my thoughts, and I've shared it with others as if I'm the big expert. And if I don't know that this has any basis, then I'm sorry, it can't be, right? I mean, even Rabbi Deren never heard of it. So, but that Hashem usually helps me. And in the English translation of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch that was published by Kahas, so there's a footnote in this place in Shulchan Aruch, and he says exactly what I just said, that this rumor about this minhag not applying on white wine, only on red wine, is a myth. And it's actually, it's not true. So if you're going to follow the minhag, it's not going to help you to make Kiddush on white wine. If for whatever reason you don't follow the minhag, there's plenty of grounds to maintain your righteous status. But if you do want to keep the minhag, so it's not going to help you to make Kiddush on white wine. Okay, so this is what I would like to share with you today. I think I became the host, so I guess it's up to me to bring
push the end button.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, good Shabbos, everyone. I'm here at the Ohel for Shabbos. My wife and Bracha are participating in the grand Kiddush. So I'm basically just I was the chauffeur to pick up Bracha in Monsey and to bring her to New York. Today she's very busy, chaperoning whatever. It's something that she's an usher. She's an usher at one of the events today of the Kiddush. So she has a very important job. And I figure, okay, they're busy, and I'll just go to the Ohel for Shabbos, and here I am. So regards from the Ohel, and I hope you all have a very a bracha dike Shabbos, and don't forget to overflow your Shabbos, your Kiddush cup. Make sure that there's a plate underneath it, so it doesn't make a mess, and in that way you're safe from any issues of what's brought in Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Where are you driving, by the way, Chaim?
We're driving towards the Poconos.
Oh, you're heading to the Poconos. Good for you. Okay, so good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos, Rabbi.
Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi.
New York.
Okay.
Have us in my davening and by the Ohel.
Yes. By Verbringing. I'm pouring over my cup. I don't know if it'll be wine or something else, but we're gonna pour it over and we're gonna say L'chaim, and I'll have all my good friends in mind. Okay, thank you very much. Good